James, welcome to our business value chat series. How are you today?
Yeah, very good from Martin. Thank you very much for inviting me.
No, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Look, so for the benefit of the audience, before we start, we'd love if you could just introduce yourself, give a little bit of background, and what brought you into the world of business value or value consulting.
Yeah, no problem at all. I currently work or I lead the value advisory team for Splunk here in Europe. I've got 15 people reporting into me at the moment. I joined Splunk about 4 years ago from Salesforce, where I was part of a quite innovative, adjacent to value selling type program, more about the vision to value rather than the actual value itself, depending on how you define it, called Ignite. It's a program sponsored by Mark Benioff. I joined there from Oracle, where I was part of the Insight program, which I know is quite well known in the value selling circles. And I joined Insight from mainstream consulting, KPMG, Capgemini. I tend to introduce myself who's been somebody who's been designing, delivering, or selling change for the last 20 odd years.
Amazing. And how is that? You say you're designing change on behalf of your customers, or how does that relate to business value consulting?
My personal belief system is that people don't necessarily buy products; they buy change. And what you're trying to do, is whether you're a seller in terms of value selling, whether you're a seller in terms of product selling, etc., is try and identify what that change is and create a compelling case that the customer will buy into. So when I talk about designing, delivering change, I've either done the design work within sort of KPMGs and Capgeminis and etc., what that future could look like, even in the Ignite program, delivering it, part of external consulting, and selling change is trying to identify those factors beyond the objective price or utility of a product that essentially build up a level of trust with a buying partner, a customer, that allows them to make that investment, that leap of faith into the future.
It's interesting because change is usually a pretty uncomfortable place to be for many people, right? Even people who work in change management.
Well, no, Martin, I think you're absolutely right. Buying anything is an uncomfortable process. You're putting risk in it. You're investing in something that is the future. So we've got to recognize that it is uncomfortable for a lot of our customers to buy change. They're putting their trust and faith into a product, into a person, into an organization. And part of the selling process, whether it's, value selling is a very important component of this, but whatever the selling process is trying to help somebody be more comfortable in that change. And so as you recognize it's change, it changes the psychological contract between yourself and the buyer. For me, with my 20 years experience, the thing I've identified most is that human element to it, the customer-centric human element to it. And the best sellers are the ones that seem to be able to connect at that human level and build that level of trust. Different ways of doing that, lots of different tools and techniques. There's huge amounts of literature on it. But essentially, when you boil it down, it comes down to a standard sort of change equation. And understanding the dissatisfaction or desirability in the current state, helping to create that compelling vision of the future, and reducing the perceived risk of the first steps to get there. And once you get that equation balanced, people do buy. And people, what you're selling to them, and often build much longer term, more sustainable relationships.
And maybe when you arrive to them, it's called change. When you leave them, it's called transformation. It's almost
exactly, right? Exactly. Yeah, you're 100%. Totally agree. Value sellers to a large extent, we are change agents, and the best value sellers I've met in the past, and everybody has different tools and techniques to do this. There's a very big school of people out there with lots of different skills, lots of different experiences they bring, but ultimately they're all agents of change. And they can all identify and communicate what that compelling nature is, either through numbers or through visions that allow an organization, as you said, to transform into the future. And with digital technologies, AI technologies, and the pace of change that's happening now, that both builds up one desirability to be out of the future, to greet your customer when they arrive, but also the sense of trepidation in making that leap. Who's going to be first? Who's going to be second? What happens if, my career, is it good for my career? Is it bad for my career? There's all these sorts of human elements, which Fortunately, with AI emerging rapidly, the human is still an important part of that jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, because you can automate a lot of the process, but the buyer emotional, reputational needs are never going to be able to be replaced by AI, right? Like you said, to address their challenges.
Yeah, exactly. You know, we're all learning how to use AI in our environment. No surprising, the meme is one of the ones that I think Grok is pushing quite heavily at the moment because it's a way of conveying human emotion. You know, the meme is something that's very human in a funny, strange sort of way. But we're all starting to learn how to use it. And those of us that learn to balance both the subjective and the pragmatic within it, and don't use it as don't use it as a crutch, but use it as a conversation, I think will come out very strongly. Both in the sort of value selling environment and anything we do.
One of the things that are very interesting is that so you worked at some very, very large companies with very, very well crafted and structured business value consulting or value practices. And you would expect those organizations like Oracle, like Salesforce, that have that business value services team, and many of the other of the big boys, the big ones out there. One of the things that we found is that there's some stat, I think it was by Rev Genius, that stated that only 19% of sales teams actually apply value selling. And I'm sure that 19% is concentrated within those big companies. What do you think are the challenges? Because we all know the benefits, right? We all know the benefits of applying a MEDDIC or MEDPIC qualification approach and a vast variety of different types of value selling tools and methodologies. What do you think is holding back a lot of the other companies, some of which are still very large, but don't have the value expertise as part of their DNA?
That's a very good question. It's one I've been sort of mulling over for some time. I personally feel some of it is based on the orthodoxy of sales. So if you think about some of the best sellers in the world, you know, they can't necessarily decompose their secret sauce. They're just very good at relationships. And that crux of relationship selling, that black book, has, you know, enabled some of these sellers to have a very, very good, strong career. But they haven't necessarily boiled down what that relationship means. This is why I come back to this change thing. Often the relationship is about that building of trust and that building of security. Ultimately, value selling, if you decompose it into those terms, is something all sellers do naturally. But over time, value selling has become very much around the quantitative number. And the quantitative number becomes some sort of black box. And that has fear, right? So if you turn around and say to the, remove the fear of the numbers and focus on how the numbers are telling the story and what's the story you want to tell, you can try and change it. So there's that sort of element to it. I think as well, it's just pure perceived cost of sale, right?
Yes.
There is a perception of the cost of sale around value selling. You need to get experts like us in to convey those messages. And there's especially smaller companies, cost of sale, everything has a cost to it. And there's emerging tools and techniques, we're talking to yourselves, that can bridge that gap. But you still need to bring the seller on that journey, and you still need to change that conversation so they understand that value selling is from end to end, not just at that last moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And look, it aligns with some of the stuff that we're seeing, that, reps are busy, especially, and one thing is the enterprise strategic, which maybe handle two, maybe even just one deal a month or a quarter, right? If they're big enough deals. But we work with companies which have a very large, even mid-market sales team, where they're handling 8, 10, 12 deals a month, and they're doing their own pipeline generation. They don't have an SDR team. And so for them, the actual investment in time to learn and then think about applying value selling, thinking about, an average ACV, even of, 30K, 20K.
Yeah.
There's this misconception that it will actually slow things down and that you may not hit target by applying it, right? And so that's a challenge, because even MEDPIC, everybody wants to do MEDDIC. It's it makes all the sense in the world. Yeah. But when you're a rep that's saying, right, if I do this and try to learn this in the next 2 months, what impact is that going to have on my own pipeline in the short term? it scares people off, and I imagine rightfully so, right? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I 100% agree with you. It's, there's a lot of pressure on sellers. I'm not a seller. I sell change, but I don't close. And to the art and science of closing is something that sellers really bring to the table. And sometimes I believe that people underestimate the mental effort to do that.
And underestimate the amount of admin that they have to do. People forget that if you're a good sales rep, there's a lot of note taking, even if you have AI, a lot of reporting and admin, right?
Yeah, there's all the contracting, there's the commercial side of it. You got to go through legal. You often got to go through the legal of the other company. There is a lot of effort at that stage. And whilst there's often a lot of investment in support for pre-sale services around solution engineering, etc., and there is support at scale in the legal side of things, it is a lot of effort. There's a lot of management time to do that. And, what we got to be looking at, and this is what excites me about things like AI, is how can we start using large language models for them to be able to have a discussion with a model about what they're seeing as the unmet needs, the sort of utility of it. Combining that with some basic data sets and and some basic benchmarking. So the whole production becomes a more conversational piece for them, because I believe that they feel at ease in a conversation. So, as this evolves, I am seeing or feeling that a lot of the scaled support, instead of producing the sideware as such, it becomes more of a conversation that produces the artifacts that enable people to support it. And because they've been part of that discussion with the large language models, they're able to then convey the messaging with much more personal feeling of personal comfort, confidence. Does that make sense? I'm thinking quite big picture here, so apologies. I'm thinking about the future.
But what you just said, it just gave me the thought that actually the current value selling methodologies, and maybe I'm wrong, so please correct me if I am. Current value selling methodologies have really been thought for the large deals, right? The identification, implication, indication, all the three Y's, of course, will always exist, right? That's something that will never. But you can have an accelerated version of that. But if you think about the way Medic, and I've read the book or books, and different value selling methodologies are taught or shared, they've been thought through from the lens of the big lumpy deals. Yeah. And there hasn't been, from my understanding, and maybe very limited, there hasn't been an adaptation of that for a universe of much higher velocity deals, right? And I'm not doing this to plug my company, but the need to be able to move things quicker with the main parts, right? If you think about Medic, the M and the I's, right? That's really the two most important parts, right? If you could have a condensed version that helps reps move quickly through that process, bring a value hypothesis, get that business case generated collectively or collaboratively with their prospect, I feel like there's a need there to address, what should be like the meat and the heart of a pipeline.
Yeah, again, find myself agreeing at all those premises. We're trying to develop a team at the moment where you can do the three levels, as it were. Now, one of the challenges I think all organizations have found at the scale side is the immediate thing to scale is scale the spreadsheet essentially and have a productized slideware that comes out, spits out the back of it. And, that's had its sort of hype cycle. And
seen a lot of those.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of those. And unfortunately, like any hype cycle, we're now onto the wave where people have started to really understand what scaled intelligent selling is. And, unfortunately, there's still some scars from that. Sellers have tried to use it, produce the slide deck, don't understand the slide deck because it's too big. The capabilities moved on faster than the machine that produces it. So it becomes detracted and the cost of support for it is too high. Right. So they've sort of like gone through that phase and dumped it. And what we're looking for really in teams like myself now is that intelligent ability to scale it. Now, whether there's a Center of Excellence human team, which is what we used at Oracle as such back in the day, or whether it's something, as I said, more conversation you can build in mutuality and agile enough to respond to changing market demands, changing product capabilities, changing nuances of the market around us at pace. And that's quite a difficult thing for a product to work within. Yeah, the ability to scale and be agile is not an easy thing to do in a technology.
And what we're finding is that a lot of companies are starting to try to scale that value team by hiring people offshore, right? People with that scale. And it's a bit like the Ford analogy. It's a faster horse, right? Because it's going to solve a certain problem, but it's not where we think that the market is going, which is agreed, like you were saying, using the right tools for the right part of the process to enable the right types of activities to develop.
Yeah. And again, it comes down to this sort of how value selling's evolved over time. It's evolved out of the big beasts, where having a consultative value selling, or the value engineer, is basically a consultant, right? They're a business and management consultant. They're not,
and most come from that space for sure.
Yeah. So a lot of them come from that space. Some of the people I've learned most from are sort of like ex-McKinsey, ex-Bain, the usual suspects. And it works incredibly well at that. But as you said, it's not a replicable model. And to a large extent, that in itself built up a fear factor within sellers and a perception of what it is, which is a black box.
And if somebody's next to you, they're ex-McKinsey, there's a bit of intimidation factors. Like, am I going to be able to replicate what this person's bringing?
Exactly. We got to all recognize different strengths and weaknesses. He said, I don't close. You've got the offshore one, which is trying to mimic it at scale. But what it's losing is the key point. I come right back to the start. We are, customers buy value and sellers are selling value all the way through the cycle, and okay, value engineering sort of like boils itself down to a certain degree to a number. But it's the story behind the number. It's how you bring the story to life, which is the important thing. And I think decoupling those two elements have created this sort of like hammer and nail approach to a problem. Being we call it being accidentally marvelous, right? They press the button, the value seller turns up, produces the slides, gives them the slides. Oh my god, it's accidentally marvelous. But if you do enough of those, 10 a day or whatever it is, 10 a month, 10 a week, whatever it may be, you're bound to get a percentage ratio of success, right? It's just normal.
Who doesn't want accidentally marvelous, right?
Exactly. And we all like being heroes, right? Let's face it. A lot of sales organizations have built up hero approaches to things. And what we're trying to do is shift the balance towards being intentionally brilliant and being intentional about it. If you start from, I'm trying to sell change to an organization that, to your point, is scary. How do I understand what they're scared of? And what do they, and some of that scare is not change, and some of that scare is change. So how do I understand why, what's holding them back? And how do I construct that conversation through that lens of value selling or the psychology of it to a point where you're putting the compelling case to change, the why, what, how. And through the sales journey, I'm thinking about the value structure all the way through and using it to qualify the customer. You talked about the value hypothesis earlier on. We don't do that enough. I think these are your problems, and I think this is the value you're trying to get out.
It's a great prompt, right? Like, prove me wrong.
Prove me wrong. Yeah. Whether it's the value stacks or value pyramids or CCVs, whatever you want to call them, having that prompt, and I tend to tell my sellers to do it in rough. Don't make it look pretty. Sketch it out. Give me a prompt here. That qualifies whether the customer's really got a compelling need to do something, because they will start engaging in it. And it then qualifies where you're going to focus. So why not do it earlier instead of doing it later and wasting 9 months?
I couldn't agree more. You can qualify them in or out at that early stage just with that hypothesis.
Exactly. So this is where the tools really come in to their own, because that conversation with the tool, whether it's a large language model or just more of a static one, or just, right, I think these are their variables, I think these are their concerns, right? What does that discussion shape out like? Let's have that discussion with the customer. They will either lean in, and go, actually, you're close, but I would prioritize that. I want to do this. Actually, those numbers aren't quite accurate. Here's some better numbers. Or they'll lean back, in which case you've got to think with 12 deals in a month, you can save a lot of time by qualifying earlier. And you can then judiciously place your bets, which means that, your success ratios are going to be higher. And that's ultimately what sales productivity is.
PPR. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we've got a very particular position or hypothesis, which is every single purchase on the buy side is made with a business case. If a company's buying paper clips, there's a reason. There's a business case for that. Maybe it's not a long form document, but somebody has made the case to purchase those paper clips or that software, ERP solution, whatever it may be. So if everybody is buying using a business case, and most of people that need to build a business case, in the case that they do, have probably never done it, right? They don't really know, they don't really have a concept. It's a pretty, complex process, right? Why not start? Why not enable a team, a sales force to actually sell using a business case, but use that from the very beginning as a draft tool, and say, like you yourself said, build a value hypothesis right directly on a business case. Of course, the content of that business case may vary from one person to another, but if it looks pretty rough, but it has those variables there, what we found is a lot of companies that are using our solution, they will use those in that very early stage. And by sharing it with that prospect on the screen, it gives a reason for the questions that they're asking. Because a lot of the time, your buyer on the first call, they may not want to give you a lot of information because they may be very cagey, rightfully so. They're like, why should I give you what I would consider pretty confidential information? But it gives a reason. Then what you're doing is you're using the business case throughout the entire process and solidifying it in collaboration with your partner. We found that helps to basically remove the need for the traditional. It's still value selling, but taken from a very different direction. And it may not be the case with some of the very larger complex deals, because obviously there is a lot more to it. But for the vast majority of deals, it tends to suffice.
Again, find myself agreeing fervently with that. As you said, it's trying to understand the scope and scale of the impact your product will have on an organization. And as you said, a lot of this learning's come from enterprise selling, which has got, multiple siloed parts of the organization, lots and lots of vested interest. It is a navigational human nightmare to get through. And the construction of the business case is a complex Rubik's Cube that you've got to put together over time. Whereas, you're talking to a department, they've got a challenge, and we've got to remember they've already triggered the challenge because they've normally reached out or responded to something of awareness. So there's something there. And what they're trying to do in their first instance is learn from you as an organization. What's your relevance to them? What's your credibility for them? What's going to be the impact of you? Now, you can enhance all those three elements with some slightly tailored messaging. And if you think about that early stage hypothesis as a tailored messaging pack, typically, organizations of your industry have these sorts of challenges. Do these resonate? Right? Yeah. Typically, organizations of your scope and scale have these types of metrics. How close are they? Typically, so not only are you building credibility because you understand the market, you're building relevance to them because you're starting to tailor the numbers towards them and you're identifying the impact. And they will then continue to lean in which case they'll help you adjust the messaging. Or they'll lean back and go, yeah, that's great, but it's not really for us. Right? In which case, it's said, you burn an hour's prep and an hour's meeting. Fine.
Better know then than later down.
Better know then. And then other than, yes, I'm pick. I've identified this and I've done the economics and all the rest of it. I'll tick the boxes, but you haven't got the human qualification. And different cultures actually qualify differently as well. The Brits are always like, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I'm interested. Well, no, I'm not. But the Dutch are like, no, go away.
Have you tried to value sell in Bulgaria? This is no and this is yes. So it's a completely different buying signal.
Exactly. And this is again where the sellers become really important, the value selling, again, coming back to the human change element, because they can recognize human responses in different cultures
and adapt
better than a consultant from the UK, right? I don't have selling to the French, selling to the Bulgarians. Yeah, they're all different. There's cultural nuances there, which means that relationship between either the value selling transaction needs to understand the cultural signals and then needs to say qualify in or qualify out. And as you say, these high velocity sales, when cost of sales is very important and time is scarce, the ability to qualify in and out much earlier in a sales cycle or defer it and focus on different things is critical to the success of you as an individual seller, but also the organizational growth rates.
Changing direction here a little bit. As a team leader, and you manage 15 people, you said on your team, how much of your day-to-day is supporting sales versus how much of your team is actually managing your team, either through coaching of the value consultants or supporting them in the projects that they have? Right.
The simple answer is there's me, and I've got 15 reports. So I'm technically the coach for everything. But what I create is squads and tribes type approach to it. It's impossible to. I'm a great believer in learning through inspiration, osmosis. Having a learning mindset. I'm very, very lucky in the sense that the vast majority of my team, I recruit them because they want to share. They want to learn from each other. So what I then do is create squads at a regional level, and I create tribes of learning, essentially, where they share the emerging ideas as they go through. As I said, what I'm trying to do is create almost a pyramid type structure from a learning point of view. You've got the tip of the spear, new products being released, new complexities arising, new customer needs are coming. It takes more time and effort to invest in those, and we've got a methodology and approach to that. Right. We then have the sort of fat middle where it becomes known knowns, and it's a bit more repeatable, but it still requires the sort of coaching effort. And then we're building out this more higher scales. It's not scaled, it's repeatable at higher velocity type mechanism.
Almost self-service.
Almost self-service. We've actually got self-service taught, but the adoption rates are dreadful. So we've had to sort of building and try to balance that portfolio across those three things. So what we're constantly looking for is a flow rate into higher velocity.
Yeah, because I can imagine you mentioned a good point there. Your product from a company perspective is always evolving. So the value needs to be, the value that it delivers is also evolving. So I imagine there's a fair amount of work in just keeping up and making sure that the value story and the value hypotheses are always as up to date with the promise of the product.
Yeah. And again, a lot of the organizations start decoupling that. So they decouple the teams that delivery to the team that's building out the thought leadership, for whatever expression, the master spreadsheets or and, my learning from Salesforce, actually, this a big takeaway from Salesforce is this crowdsourcing of innovation, this ability to respond unmet needs at pace, and then crowdsource the ideas and allow the ideas to evolve at pace themselves, because people recognize a good idea and deliver it, as opposed to going into more of a navel gazing exercise with a unique team that doesn't, it's trying to get the balance right between those 2 points. So there's that initial MVP, for whatever expression. There's that initial test and learn phase. Is it going to get legs? And then the market naturally pulls it into a scaling phase. Rather like any product, if you're selling a product to the market, it's the same sorts of principles that you're trying to apply in value selling, essentially. It makes it a little bit more ambiguous to work within, and a bit more challenging for my team because they're never quite sure what idea I'm going to come up with next, or somebody's going to come up with next. But it also makes it more interesting and engaging for them because they feel that they're constantly adding value. And as a team, we're constantly going up the value curve. Yeah. A lot of value teams stagnate and don't necessarily continue to progress up the value curve. And that puts the teams at risk because we are a high cost overhead. Yeah. We've constantly got to be pushing that value up that curve.
Makes a lot of sense. You mentioned that the self-service tool didn't get very much adoption. What do you think is the reason? Is it touching upon what we said earlier, that reps are just busy and it's hard to change the way that they do things? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, so to say.
I'd boil it down to sort of three parts. That's definitely that one. I do believe the number of times I hear from a sales organization is too complex. And I look at them and go, no, you're just unwilling to try and learn. Right. You know, there's that sort of aspect to it, which I do find quite frustrating in a lot of sales organizations. They've been successful doing a certain way in a certain thing for a certain period of time. You know, future success is based on previous success. It's not. And complexity is seen as, or challenges in learning are seen as too complex.
There's always a fear of that you're only as good as your last quarter, right? So if anything dips, there's always that fear. Exactly.
There's also the element of UX, UI design. Yes, I agree. You've got to make it simple. You've got to make it easy, which is why I'm really intrigued by the sort of large language and what the impact of large language modeling will have on this, because filling in boxes is scary. Writing out, and we've all done it now with ChatGPT, writing your thoughts out and throwing some numbers in it and seeing what miraculously appears is less concerning. So I'm going to be interested to see that curve. But that ability to be constantly updating that back end needs to be something that is addressed from UX, UI, that sort of whole user experience, to make it feel less of an overhead and much more connected to what's happening today rather than what happened yesterday. And the third element is just simply leadership. You know, I'm sorry, but sales leadership may tick the boxes, but they don't necessarily, drink the Kool-Aid. You know, they changing your teams and encouraging value selling is hard work. It takes constant reinforcement over a long period of time to establish a new routine and a new pattern. And sales leaders are very busy in themselves and often been very successful in a charismatic way. And that discipline of change is not necessarily always a sweet spot skill set.
Yeah, and I think you very subtly put it, but I may bring it out a little bit more. I'm sure there's some personality clashes in terms of don't tell me how to do things.
Yes, very much so.
You're much more subtle than I.
Yeah, I've got a job to do tomorrow. Yeah. And anybody who's been in value selling understands the nuance of the relationship with your sales leadership and yourself is always something to pay attention to.
100%. Well, look, James, I do have two more final questions for you. First one is, across your career, which has been pretty comprehensive, who have been some of the best value sellers that you've ever worked with?
Decomposing a sort of 15 years in this space is difficult. I'm very lucky. I've got an incredible team myself, so I've got to call a couple of those out in themselves. There's a chap called Luke Bear. For those of you from an Oracle background, I've got him with me, and his passion for value selling is off the charts. His ability to sort of look at those and decompose those numbers, those ideas, and share them, is incredible. And actually another chap who's come from Oracle. Actually, I just remembered a guy in France, Naaman. He's also been incredibly impactful on the team from a value selling point of view. But a lot of this comes back to my Oracle days. When I was at cold face with the team, etc. And the learning there. And I tend to look at good value sellers. There's obviously good value sellers that are very good in front of the customer, etc., etc. But for me, the difference between good to great is how others learn from you, how you're inspired by them. And I'm going to call out a couple of people who I'm sure are going to be very embarrassed. There's a guy called Ashish Sulida, who's now actually a sales director for another company. But his ability to translate complex information into simple slideware and communicate it with enhanced stories, I copied with. That's an art. I copied. Yeah, I've still got his slides in some of my decks. And VJ, a guy called VJ Remisuri, I think you might know him actually. VJ
from Salesforce.
From Salesforce, yeah. VJ, he understands people.
Lovely guy. Lovely.
Incredible seller, but he's got a different skill set, which is that more sort of people side of things, and able to navigate that. So those two I'm I've learned a lot from in my career, and I still use a lot of their skills and techniques today.
Brilliant. Any from your value engineering days, or do they kind of merge together?
They merge together, you know. Sort of like value engineering, value consulting, they're the value selling. They all sort of merge together, and as such, you know.
Yeah.
From a leadership point of view, there's a guy called Rui, who was very good to me again back in Oracle days. And from a Salesforce point of view, a guy called Jason Wild, who introduced me to the more of the sort of human concept of change and the design of change. So, you know, yeah, learned a lot. I've been very lucky to work with some absolutely brilliant people over the years. I haven't mentioned anybody, sorry. You can kick me later.
Oh, good. Oh, good. James, thank you so much for your time. This was a lovely, lovely call. Great chat.
Martin, pleasure. Yeah, we're all learning from each other. And, you know, it's something that is a gift. Take it or leave it. Such.
For sure. For sure.